wasn't a Lamar. She was a Lauren, and she was a mommy.
My name's Johnny2000, and after spending over $100,000 on 8 to 10 years of college for executive producing and writing TV, I produced over 5 multi-year web series, producing over 100 episodes of original content, all in exchange for a development year at Nickelodeon, where I got to sell a TV movie and wait for a year as it got canceled. And the most success I've found since then is a YouTube channel only talking about the shows I used to grow up watching, so you guys are gonna have to join me on that. But today I wanted to use my expertise to actually dive into the coolest part of TV show development.
Babies don't get birth, it comes out somewhere else.
Oh boy.
So what's a production Bible? First off, it goes by a couple of different names. Different networks call them different things based on how they develop the show. Some shows start out just with a pilot, some start out just with a production Bible. Others might not have any of these documents and just go right to series. The point of this document is to communicate the spirit of the show within words and pictures, so that way any of the writers on the staff can have the consistent voice that the main brain power has. You know how with SpongeBob we say the first 3 seasons are good, but then after that it's bad? That's because Steven Hillenburg was at the helm of the first 3 seasons, but then wasn't on it afterward, making this brain power almost so important to the product that it couldn't survive without it. But when done right, you have a communicative document that actually makes everything consistent. Usually it consists of the premise and format, like how the show is structured and what it's about. Then we have the character biographies, which is a little bit of a deep dive on what these people mean to the story and to each other, and just like what their quirks are, like what makes them a flawed character, what makes their goals important, a lot of the stuff you actually go into a show wanting to see. We got world rules and backstory, which is always important, especially for a show like Avatar: The Last Airbender, where you need to know what happened with the war, where some might actually be less important, like Camp Lazlo, for example. Like, they don't need to go into the backstory, while shows like SpongeBob or Adventure Time do have this connective tissue to it. One of the most important parts of these things are the season or episode outlines, which actually really break down the structure of what's supposed to happen in every episode, which is, to me, the core anatomy of a TV show. Tone and themes are also important because they establish how much of something is a comedy versus a horror, like Courage the Cowardly Dog. That would be an interesting take. I'm sure they prioritize the comedy, but they also have the lore. And specifically, every episode starts, goes, and ends in a very similar fashion, something that a lot of shows don't really do. If you're a cartoon, you need a lot of visual references, animated parts, like if the eyes are a certain way, you want to communicate that to the rest of the artists. And TV shows like live action wouldn't have as many of those. They would more be stories and characters and focus on that. Continuity details are also super important, because if there's any distinguishing things as an artist I want to put in my characters, I need all my artists to know that. Camp Lazlo, out of all shows, has one of the most creative Bibles. It starts out looking like a handbook for a Bean Scout, which is really creative because the whole show is centered around being a Bean Scout. And on the front it says a camper's updated field guide to drawing and producing Cartoon Network's Camp Lazlo, which is actually really cute. And this was produced in June 7th of 2004, and the show didn't even air till July of 2005. So this is like super in advance because of how long it takes cartoons to be made. Who created this Bible was Joe Murray, who just left Rocko's Modern Life in 1996 and kept a notebook of ideas and TV shows. He used his days at summer camp to inspire this show, and he couldn't get the scouting thing down, which was actually so funny. He described the cartoons as like parodies of Bugs Bunny from Looney Tunes, or like Yogi Bear, as having this like calming effect with tree-filled backgrounds. And at the time, he believed that too many futuristic themes appeared in media, so he wanted to create something that would go back to the nature of it all. Camp Lazlo started from this camp-related kids book series, so he developed a concept that he felt like had enough of his lunatic characters, and decided a simple story could not sufficiently house the characters. He had to create something about like a group group of children without having high-tech stimulus. Linda Semensky, who also worked with Murray on Rocko's Modern Life, had moved to Cartoon Network and actually brought him in to solicit this new series. After hesitation, Murray ended up sending her an idea for a show called Three Beans, which would be a Bean Scout term. She thought it sounded too much like a salad, so he changed it to Camp Lazlo. Once he got the approval, he decided to produce the show at Cartoon Network, and they brought Mark O'Hare on as a co-producer. According to Murray, the greenlight process was initially given and then later revoked, which is actually really frustrating, making both of the creators depressed. Like, I would be too. Same thing happened to me when I worked at Nickelodeon. Murray believed that as an executive, he wasn't completely sold on the series, which makes a lot of sense why they felt like they needed a series Bible. As you know, this show went on for 5 seasons, being one of the most successful Cartoon Network shows ever, and even though I thought it was only going on for like 1 season, this show was actually a lot of merit. It's famous for its controversial finale, which ends up having the Scoutmaster go to an insane asylum because none of the events actually happened, which is insane to think about. We start out with the table of contents, and it's so cool that we have this long of a production Bible. Usually a lot of them get lost to history because they don't release the entire thing, or it's owned by the network, so it's very, like, limited. Here we got the overview, setting, series synopsis, main characters, secondary characters, notes on writing, model sheets, style, color and backgrounds, production notes, and conclusion. Whether animated show, you probably have so many more sections you have to add as opposed to like a normal live action show where you don't really have to talk about some of the drawing stuff. This is cool because it's also the perspective of a show that hasn't been sold yet, so there's a lot to prove in these documents. For example, the quick overview, Bean Scout Lazlo, along with his scouting companions, Clam and Raj, decide to try out a 4-week summer camp in the Pimpleback Mountains called Camp Kidney. Little did they know that their rebellious, nonconformist, and optimistic nature would clash so much with the neurotic Scoutmaster and all of the compulsive march-in-a-straight-line scout campers that co-inhabit the camp. Since Lazlo, Raj, and Clam, among Indian elephant and pygmy rhino respectively, vow not to leave camp until they have earned at least 1 merit badge. Their 4-week stay has turned into a couple of years, much to the torture of their moose Scoutmaster and fellow campers, which include dung beetles, platypuses, and lemmings. Couple that with a squirrel scout camp full of girls across the lake, and the summer camp will never be the same, which is a really good way to introduce the show. I didn't realize at first this show had that much conflict, and it's interesting to see that Cartoon Network kind of took that out as the show progressed a little bit. Then we get a setting page with a full background art of Camp Kidney, and honestly, it is gorgeous. Look at this. It's the Bean Scout camp next to the large lake for fishing and boating, and it's called Leaky Lake. Camp Kidney is an old camp with an old PA system that transmits announcements and plays odd camp music. The camp has Scoutmaster's house and office, as well as an assembly lounge, mess hall, boathouse, housekeeping cabin, campfire amphitheater, and scout cabins, all named after beans, like Pinto Cabin or Garbanzo Cabin, Baked Cabin. Our main characters, Lazlo, Raj, and Clam, are in the Jelly Cabin, which is decorated with pink flamingos, happy face flags, Christmas lights, and peace flags. And there's a Squirrel Scout camp across from Lake Kidney, which is so funny they keep reiterating that. And the art is so gorgeous. They even have a full map of exactly how Leaky Lake is broken down, which is insane because, like, how often do you actually need this for the show? I love how they get so descriptive for no reason, like showing us where Acorn Flats is, Mount Whitehead, even the Skullcrack Rapids, things that might not even be shown in the show, but it's just good for the artists to know, so that way it's, like, all clear. They even include another page with a bird's eye view of Camp Kidney and Leaky Lake, which is so interesting because usually you would have this at a camp. Like, if you were going to the forest or the woods, like, I like that it's actually that aesthetic. They even have a side view of it with a slope, which is so cool that they had that much imagination to describe all of this. The drawings are a lot more nuanced than they inevitably ended up being, and I love how it's like that old camper style of art. It definitely reminds me of Yogi Bear. In the series synopsis, we have Camp Lazlo is an eccentric animated series that chronicles the odd and happy camping life of a bean scout named Lazlo. Lazlo joyfully skips through the poison ivy without a rash and goes head-to-head with a grouchy Scoutmaster whose only concerns are Lazlo and his cohorts earning a merit badge and leaving his otherwise orderly camp. Lazlo's ambitions, however, do not lend themselves to earning merit badges. He loves to do his best, and he cares very little about being the best or receiving material rewards, which actually is such a positive upbringing for the main character. They talk about Lazlo as a highly optimistic, high-energy, smiling Brazilian monkey who is one with the nature and the universe. His best friends, Raj, is a wise, compulsive, and insect-phobic Indian elephant, and Clam is a somewhat clueless rhino with a penchant for thrill, physical strength way beyond his size, and it's so cute how he has such loyalty to his friends. Camp Kidney is a peaceful scouting camp where Bean Scouts could come, earn merit badges, and even have a good dose of nature, run rather efficiently by a scoutmaster named Leonard Lumpus, and his ever-present banana slug assistant, Slinkman, which is such a funny character. The scout campers were usually obedient, scholarly, and didn't question authority, unlike Lazlo and his friends. Unintentionally and without malice, the trio definitely upset the entire flow of the island. We have the main character section, which has Lazlo as a free-thinking monkey in a very structured scouting camp. They emphasize in this Bible that he's without malice and that nothing is ill-intentioned, he's just optimistic and only causes chaos by accident. Kind of like SpongeBob in a way, which is so funny. Then we've got Raj, who is a new age, compulsive elephant trying to find comfort in the untidy world of a scout camp. He's born in India, and his disorders include cleaning compulsion, skin raptures, bug and snake phobias. Like, this guy is packed with everything, which is perfect contrast to the nature of the show. His sayings in his slight Indian accent are somewhat muttered, but strike a point, if not a dull point, and he joins the Bean Scouts because of his love of baked beans, which is insane. He doesn't even try to earn badges. He has a record collection and a dusty hi-fi record player, which is so cute because it is in the background of the show. Lazlo and Clam are grounding forces in his world, where happy-go-lucky are his preferable path. Aww. Then we got Clam, who is a small, loving, and very strong rhino that waddles through the camp, leaving havoc in his wake, which is so funny. He kind of reminds me of Ed from the Ed, Edd n Eddy show. Getting himself into trouble in a childlike fashion, his friends look out for him like brothers. He has a limited vocabulary, but likes to interact vocally in a somewhat juvenile voice. They use the term midget in this, which is crazy because that's not relevant anymore the way it used to be. We can't even use that term. With his naive, brute strength, he thinks nothing of tossing a friend over the river if he needs to cross it. His happy-go-lucky smile is usually only interrupted when Raj or Lazlo are in danger, making him a really reliable and trustworthy friend. Then, of course, we have Scoutmaster Lumpus. Scoutmaster Lumpus is a frustrated egomaniac with an inferiority complex, always feeling he is the victim. He has to have his world in complete order or he has a meltdown, which is perfect because the main characters clearly are the opposite of that. He really wanted to be head troop master, but he's stuck in this job in the sticks. He abuses his assistant, Slinkman, who he could not live without, but does not like to admit it. And Lazlo is way too unpredictable for his comfort or sanity. He loves fishing and tying flies. Then, of course, we got Slinkman, the thankless job of Scoutmaster's assistant, which he did not realize what he was signing up for. He knows Lumpus' schedule much better than his own. He basically keeps the camp running because Lumpus is always breaking down, making announcements on the PA, in a voice that is reminiscent of Dustin Hoffman's Rain Man, which is an interesting reference. I don't know who Dustin Hoffman is, but the fact that they have him is so funny. He doesn't have a spine, and he's essentially the right-hand man. Then we have a page for the Lemming Bros, which I don't really remember coming up a lot in the series, so it is fun that they brought so much onto them. They're scouts that are the opposite of Lazlo. They do what they're told, no original thoughts, and represent a very structured badge-earning camp that Lumpus loves. So these are his favorite characters, but we barely talk about them because it's not even in the show, but it's good to have them to really sculpt out the world. Their names are Leonard, Lumpus, and Louie, which is very interesting. They walk alike, talk alike, and say whatever the majority thinks, which is so perfect for the structure. Then, of course, we have a page for the Squirrel Scouts, the females that are essentially the women counterpart of the regular ones. And honestly, they look so different than they do in the final. Like, look at that. There's Gretchen, an ever-hungry alligator who just wants to eat, Nina, who is a gangly, bookish giraffe with a highly squeaky voice, and Patsy, who is the chirpy squirrel in love with Lazlo, which we see many times throughout the series. Since Lazlo is so uneasy around girls, he definitely gets uncomfortable with Patsy's advances, which actually makes it so funny for him to have to deal with. It brings out a side that we wouldn't normally see. Then we get the second-tier characters, so that way we know exactly who we're dealing with whenever we're in different scenes. And you probably recognize them, I know I do. There's Dave and Ping Pong, the loons, Jane Doe, who is a deer squirrel scout, Miss Mucus, the warthog assistant, and Squirrel Scout leader, of course Samson, the guinea pig, Chip and Chip, the dung beetles, and Edward the platypus, who looks so different in this than the inevitable way it ended up. We also have a page for the third tier beans, the second tier beans, just notes for everybody animating the show. Then they actually have a page about specifically the writing. Our writing in both outlines and storyboards should be upbeat and full, not mean-spirited or abusive. Humor relies on character and how these characters react in a simple, funny storyline. There's no violence except for slapstick, scatological humor, including gas, and no sexual innuendo. Although the show appeals to young and old alike, it is a show parents would gladly sit their kids in front of to watch by themselves. All stories involve the main characters and take place in the same location, like the Bean Scout Camp, Squirrel Camp, or occasionally in town, and the viewer should be comfortable with where they are. So we'll use the same locations over and over again, with the plot lines super simple. Camping in the pursuit of merit badges and communing with nature in this endless wealth of material. We put the strong main characters in these structures and let it rip. With approaching the story or storyboard, one should always keep in mind that the blocks and priorities need to be addressed with each gag, story, or bit of dialogue. And here is the triangle of how they wrote this show. First up, hilarity, then of course story, then consistency of characters, premise, and the ground rules. It also has a note not to sacrifice the bottom to get to the top, which is a very interesting way of writing, and I like that they're very particular about how it's going to be written. Writing could be looked at as a game, and no game is fun without rules. So start with the basic character traits, the premise of the show, and some ground rules that we've laid out to grow the story. From the story and foundation block come the gags, and although the humor is the most important thing, we ultimately derive it from the character's personality, and do not do it at the expense of the story or the basic premise of the show. We also have some ground rules on another page. No sexual innuendos, no in-your-face type humor, no parody, limited violence, a tether of reality to the world we have created. Even though they might be talking animals, there still has to be rules of gravity and such we need to abide by, while still keeping that in mind as being a cartoon. Give your audience credit for intelligence without going over the head of younger viewers, which is smart writing. Don't leave the world we have created, and don't bring in new characters. Also, try relatable humor, pull from our own kid experiences with this camp. Start with the core relatables, then whack them out with the cartoon land. Refrain from any gags or references to that date of the episode, like making jokes about fads, fashions, current events, whatever. And finally, don't be afraid to insert warmth. Camp Lazlo has a lot of love, friendship, and peace, and if we could take some of the subtle pro-environment stances without getting a soapbox, we could definitely do it, which is so cool that they actually reference these moments. Then we got the character sheets. One is a character size comp lineup, so we see how each character is in height-wise in relation to each other to make a more realistic experience. Then they actually talk about the primary basic shapes of these characters, which all can also be referenced in a art book, which actually has its own funny story. The guy who created the show started an art book, which is a perfect masterclass in how he designed these characters, and is actually going for a lot of money right now because it's not in complete print. We also get model sheets and turnarounds, which show the characters in a bunch of different states so the writers and animators can know how they're going to look in each scenario. They also have tricks for drawing Lazlo, which actually is really interesting. They have like adding the hat, the eyes, the ear folds, like everything that you'll need to know, which is so crazy it gets this in depth. They even have do's and don'ts of every image and how it's supposed to go, which is so impressive. Like the nose is upturned, everything looks like a beetle, like oh my gosh, they were so specific. And they have one for each character, like for example, we see Raj and his model sheet, and you get to see that like when he's running, what he's wearing, and the scuba suit. We even get Clam and his model sheet, because these are the characters that we're going to be using the most of. And yeah, it's so interesting. Camp Master Lumpus also has a character sheet, which is very specific, how his eyes are drawn, and everything that makes him as a personality, like, important. Then we also have interior and exterior design, which is a really cool style sheet showing exactly how the place should be used. For example, we have like Indian rugs, rock fireplaces, and the cabin kitchen inside. Scout cabins are screened summer camp type, and all named after the Bean Scouts, which we talked about earlier. The dwellings have lean, warped perspectives, and it's definitely showing how cartoony the show inevitably is. And even the foliage background, like how the camps are supposed to look in the very background, even though it's like watercolor that you can't always see, they show exactly what kind of trees you should have, the backgrounds, and how stylized they could be, which is so cool that it actually works out like that. We also have a color palette page, which explains exactly what colors need to be prioritized in this. It's compiled from personal color tastes, but also retro references, like old camp colors and Western and Native American pillow and rug colors, canoes, cabins, and even forest hues. The warm grayish shades definitely lend themselves to the camp feel and actually show the comfort that the main writers are going. You gotta think of like marshmallows roasted on a campfire, and that would look good in that. We also have a page explaining how the backgrounds are going to work. Like the background style is a bit brushy, utilizing patterns and textures given from a retro feel. Definitely go for the late 50s and 60s in terms of advertising and architectural illustrations. Quite often, action is occurring in front of the monochromatic dense tree design, so we gotta keep it cool in the background. Kind of how thumbnails are worked. Like, you know how like you try to have a subject and then a very non-distracting background, something typically blurred. That could be interesting. They also have an image of how the jelly cabin is going to look, which is exactly close to the final design. Then we get the interior of it with this interesting image of Finn from Adventure Time, which is crazy because it didn't even happen yet. Oh, the background samples are just gorgeous. Like, look at how they go into them. I love it. Then, of course, we have some production notes from the creator. It says, "In my intention, Camp Lazlo is designed with simplicity in mind, not only to allow for the characters, gags, and stories to be read in an optimal way, but to streamline production and keeping characters, locations, and props as simple and minimal as possible to create as much as we can. Background and prop production should be structured in a way that reduces duplication to keys and designs. We utilize graphic computer programs, establishing backgrounds and other stock that can be used to produce very quick backgrounds for newer scenes. Camp Lazlo is a storyboarded rather than scripted and utilizes animatics as important tools to get the story and gags across visually, as well as, problems at a minimum. Strong key posing and character expressions could be vital, with animation working quite often pose to pose. New affordable technology should definitely be used to its potential, and I'm sure there's a lot of shows on Cartoon Network already utilizing these methods, so we need to comply simply." Oh, interesting. In the end, we have a conclusion, which is just Lazlo on the top, and it talks about how Bibles are tricky things. Even mini Bibles create certain mini illusions. They're a bit like throwing some cells into a petri dish, and even though the cells are well established, once life begins, all that we plan here might go out the window, which is so interesting he accounted for that. The characters begin living, breathing, rapping, and tripping. Who can predict some of the happy accidents that will happen, and then we will have to reevaluate this entire thing, which is actually funny. But to the best of his ability, at this time, they have this blueprint. But to the best of my ability, at this time, this is the blueprint I can offer that will make these characters live and will create entertainment that I feel will be hilarious and will provide a healthy return on investment. Beyond that, only a fun time is guaranteed for all. Thanks for watching. Joe Murray puts a little back on this book, which is perfect for Cartoon Network Studios and definitely exemplifies what they were going for at the time. It's so cool to see Bibles like fully go all out on what they want to do, and I like that this guy's unapologetically acknowledging that this is not going to be the definitive, like, how the show is going to go. Things are going to change just like they always do, and Camp Lazlo is a perfect example of that. There's just so much positive spirit in this Bible and how it's supposed to go that you don't even necessarily need to refer to the TV series at a certain point. Like, if you're a fanfic writer, you could definitely figure out how to make your own episodes of Camp Lazlo just by this book alone. So you can imagine how this show would have kept going or how it would have shortened. It's so cool to think that these creative endeavors are really worthwhile paying off. I personally spent a lot of time on my production Bibles, especially when I'm doing like short stories. For example, when I wrote the book, The Consequences of Victoria Gray, I kept everything super minimal and wrote like rules that I thought you had to abide by, even as the reader. So it's cool to think that as a creative person, you have that much control over the final product, and then also the ability to let it go before it ends up coming out. That's one of the coolest parts of all of this stuff.